Hi, Thomas from Field Tennis. Did you know that one of the most common causes for missing shots or struggling with controlling the ball is incorrect grip? So you might have a correct preparation, correct backswing, correct follow through, you might be working with your legs and everything else, but if your grip is not right, you will struggle with controlling the ball. And today I want to explain to you the reasons why that happens, how you should try and feel the grip and not just theoretically grip the racket correctly, but how to feel the grip. And I will also show you some simple exercises taken directly from my lessons that show you how you can do little progressions to help the player feel the grip and also just develop some fundamental tennis stroke technique. So before we go on to explanations, I want to point out one very important rule that I've already mentioned before. You can click the card above and see one of my previous videos on tennis grips, but I will mention this again. So one very important thing about holding the racket is that you must never have any space between the handle and your hand. So when you're holding the racket, every part of your hand that's holding the racket must touch the racket. So for example, one very common mistake on the forehand that players do when they go for the backswing is that they are working on relaxing their wrist and then they relax their grip. So you can see this hole here. So the racket, the butt of the racket kind of leaves their hand. So that must not happen. And I'll explain today why it's so important to hold the racket like this. So anywhere where you hold the racket, there must be no space. I've seen also players hold the racket like forehand with a space here all the time. So they hold the racket and there's all the time tension and space here. So it's interesting how many different ways we can see that people hold the racket, as many ways as we see different swing paths or different backswings. And yet, let's say on the forehand there should be just maybe maximum 3 different ways of holding the racket. That's it. So when it comes to how to hold the racket, let's say for the forehand now, we'll just simplify and start with the forehand. You're usually being told to look at certain bevels and how to put the V and so on. So let's say beginner or intermediate player that's looking to find the right grip, they're doing something based on theory. So they're putting their hand on the racket, then they're making the strokes and the ball is just flying around. And the reason why the ball is flying around and they can't control the stroke is because they don't feel the grip. So what does it mean to feel the grip? When we feel the grip, it means that we feel the orientation of the racket face in space. So we know whether the racket is a little bit closed or a little bit open. And that happens in the most natural way when our hand is aligned with the racket face. So if you throw the ball to a person, you don't give them a racket and you ask them to hit the ball with the hand, then they will naturally put the hand like this. So they will just make a little, like a wall, like a mini paddle, and they will try to hit the ball like that on the forehand side. Yes. Yes, okay, very good. So they will not try to hit the ball like this with this part of the hand or like this, but they're gonna put the hand like this. So that is the most natural way, the way we interpret the racket head orientation. In this case, this is the racket head, the small hand. And in our mind, we know how the hand is oriented in space because we are doing everything with our hands our whole life. So we are very clear on how the hand is oriented in space. So I'm very early know that now my hand is closed or my hand is open. So the most logical grip that we can have for the forehand is a grip where the racket face is in the same alignment as the hand. So which means that the hand, if we put the hand like this on the racket and we slide it down and we close the fingers, this is the most logical grip. There are other grips, of course, because this one usually comes into a bit semi-western or a bit eastern grip. It depends a little bit how you come here, so it's somewhere here. But this is the most logical grip. So the logical grip means that to you it feels like you're hitting with a big hand. So the racket head is nothing else to the player on the forehand side, should feel nothing else as a big hand. So the ball is small and it's flying fast and our hand is small, so it would be difficult to hit that small ball with the hand while running around. So we use the racket to basically make our hand bigger, and it extends a bit to the side. So if we have the right grip, if we feel the grip right, then we feel that we just have a big hand. If we don't have the right grip, so let's say you go a bit to the western grip, now your hand and the racket face are not aligned, because if I open my hand, you can see that my hand is upwards, or it could be at a certain angle, so something like this. So the natural angle of the hand might be like this. I put the racket, so it's kind of a grip. Now this one is just coming something between western and semi-western. So of course these grips are possible, but they are not the most logical to the player, and that's why many times players struggle with these kinds of grips, because the grip does not logically transfer the angle of the racket into the mind through the hand, because there are different angles. My hand can be like this and the racket is like this. So therefore the player has to find different ways to align the hand in order to position the racket right. Whereas if you have this grip, so something like eastern, semi-western, then the hand angle and the racket angle are the same. And this is the most logical grip. And when I mention about feeling the grip, it means that you have to feel this back side of the racket. So it's not so much about on which bevel comes the V, but does the back or the front side of your hand come right into the back side of the racket, because this plane of the handle is the same plane as the racket face. So when we feel the grip, all these three planes align. So the racket, this part of the handle, so the back side of the handle if I'm playing that way, and my hand, they are all in the same plane. So I have to come and I have to feel the back side of the racket, assuming I'm playing that way, so this is the back side of the racket. And my hand has to nicely feel the back side of the racket, because I'm going to push this forward in a certain angle, at a certain angle, so I'm driving the racket through the ball either a bit more horizontal or a bit more upward, and I control the racket face so that the racket is not turning while I'm hitting. If the racket is doing some turning or twisting while I'm hitting, then I'm losing control of the ball. So when I'm hitting the ball, I want my racket to be steady for, let's say, 2 feet or half a meter. When I'm going through contact, I don't want to change angles of my racket. I want my racket to be steady. So in this part of the stroke, I am pushing the ball a little bit on a normal forehand. I'm not talking about short cross-court forehand, but just basic forehand from the baseline hitting to the baseline. So the racket has to be steady. So before that I make a swing, I accelerate the racket, I start body rotation, but as I'm contacting the ball, I don't want to make any funny movements, because they're gonna change the ball's direction. So through the contact, I am driving or pushing or guiding the racket. And the pushing feeling is like this, and I feel my racket, my hand going through the contact like this in a straight line. So I will feel that really well if I feel that I'm pushing the backside of the racket forward, and therefore I'm pushing the racket face very steadily through contact. So all this can happen over time very naturally if I feel the grip. If I feel that my hand and this backside of the racket are aligned, and then I feel that my hand and the racket face are in the same plane. So in a way we kind of map the racket face to our brain through the hand. It has to map, it has to transfer. As soon as we change the grip to this one or we go to continental, this mapping does not work anymore because the hand orientation and the racket orientation are now different. So now we have to develop a completely new, let's say, algorithm or something that is gonna calculate the difference between the angle of the hand and the angle of the racket, and through a lot of repetition, of course, that can be developed. But that grip is not natural, it's not logical. And so this way is the most logical. So maybe now you also understand why one of the tricks of how to learn the grip is to pick up the racket from the ground. So they say put the racket on the ground and grab it. But I have a better trick. I think I have a better trick that gives the player the right sensation and understanding. Why do we hold the racket like this, and that it's not about bevels and angles, but it's about feeling the grip. So if the right grip will automatically transfer the sensation of the racket head angle into your mind. So when you swing the racket, you will know exactly how the racket is oriented, because you naturally know how your hand is oriented in space since many years. When it comes to one-handed backhand, I'm going to make a separate video about some very interesting views on the one-handed backhand grip. But today I just want to mention that similarly, like we have to feel the backside of the racket through the hand on the forehand, we have to feel the backside of the racket on the backhand. So we must not just hold the racket in some way and then we make a stroke and we wonder why the stroke doesn't work. And the reason why the stroke doesn't work is because we come to the contact with the wrong angle of the racket. So it can be too close or can be too open. And many times the racket is at the wrong angle because we hold the racket in the wrong way. And our body wants to position very naturally into the position how it's designed to do. And let's say if I have a continental backhand grip and I come to the contact very naturally and I have a stable position of the hand, then the racket face is open. So now I have to do some compensation in order to compensate for the incorrect grip to put the racket face correctly. And all this is straining my arm, and it's difficult to find the right position on every stroke. So this is an example of trying to hit a backhand, one-handed backhand with a continental grip. So naturally it's wrong. So it might only work naturally for a very low ball, but normally it's difficult, and especially high balls are very difficult. So the hand would always, the body, the arm would always have to find a solution for this. Whereas when we have the right grip, we can close our eyes, we do like this, and the racket is correct. Because the hand will naturally position in a very stable position how the joints are designed. So similarly, if you have the grip too, like very western, very closed, then if you come to contact, the racket is too closed. So now you have to do some movements in your arm in order to compensate for this, in order to position the racket face correctly. So in the same way, if you want to feel your backhand grip correctly, one-handed backhand, then it means that your hand must align with the back side of the racket so that you can push the racket forward through the contact very steadily. So in the same way, you must feel, like on the forehand, you must feel this bevel, and the back side or the front side of your hand has to align here. You have to find it a bit through experimentation, that you feel that when you're pushing the racket through contact, you are on the back side of the racket, and that will be the most natural way to hold the racket. What about two-handed backhand? So two-handed backhand is similar, but here we have a little bit of variation because we like the players to hold the racket with their dominant hand a bit more to the eastern side or even continental. So continental and continental is fine. And the reason why we have a bit more variation is because we have two hands to stabilize the racket. When we're playing with one hand, we just have one wrist to stabilize the racket. And when the racket swings, the wrist might be too weak to control this momentum that we create with the swing. If the grip is wrong, a little bit off, and therefore we must really find the right grip. When we have two hands on the racket, we have a bit more stability on the racket. That's why you will see much more variations, or many more variations, on the two-handed backhand grips. So this one Eastern, this one Continental, or this one a bit Eastern, this one a bit Western, and so on. So many more variations, but the principle is the same for the main hand, which means in some way you have to feel that you're on the back side of the racket. You don't have to be exactly on the Eastern grip. You can go a bit like here on this side, that you still feel good position, at least your fingers, in certain way that you can drive the racket through contact right. So it's the most important is this hand. So for right-handers, the left hand, that it feels the back side of the racket. And I will show you again how I do the exercise for the two-handed backhand. Because on the two-handed backhand, players get lost with their grips the most, because they have so many sensations coming from the grip, because they have two hands on the racket, and in a way they get lost, they get overloaded with sensation of the handle, and then they lose the sensation of the orientation of the racket facing space. So they hold the racket, but they don't know how the racket is oriented in space. So when they're hitting the ball, the racket is wrong, at wrong angle, and they miss the shot. And no amount of correcting the backswing or the weight transfer or the follow through is going to help this player, because naturally when they come to contact, they don't know their racket is wrong. They don't know how it's right. Yes, here we go. Yes. Yes, here we go. So we must give the player the sensation, the right sensation, that they feel how the racket is oriented in space. And again, as I mentioned, the most logical or natural way to feel the racket orientation is that it's aligned in the same way as our hand at contact. So what is the main reason why players don't feel the grip? And therefore they don't feel the orientation of the racket in space. The main reason is that they feel the racket too round in their hand. They don't feel the back side. So there are different types of grips on the racket. So I have here two, and I will show you the difference. So this one is one Wilson racket, and you can see that this racket has quite a round butt, and the whole handle is quite round compared to this Focal racket. So you can see that this Focal racket is a bit more like elliptical, which means it has a bigger bevel on the side when we're holding the racket. So this racket, the Wilson racket, feels very round in my hand, and therefore even I find it a bit difficult to feel the back side of the racket. So to a beginner player, this racket will feel round like a stick, and therefore they don't know how is the racket face aligned, because they can't feel the back side of the racket. They just grab it like a baseball bat or something round, and they whack with it, and they don't know how the racket is aligned. So this racket, if I show you the handle, you can see that it's more elliptical, and it has a bit bigger bevel here on the back side. So when I come to this racket on the back side, I feel it much better. Yeah, just ignore that the string is broken. So I'm just showing you that the racket, that you see that there are different shapes. The handles are different shapes, and the handles that are round will give you a lot of problems when you try to feel the racket orientation, because you will feel that you hold like a round stick in your hand. So somehow you need to transfer or copy, or in a way find out, how do I get from a round stick to a flat surface that I need to put on the back side of the ball for a normal stroke? And that's very tricky, right? So what we need to feel is that the racket handle is not round, but it's a bit elliptical, and that we can put the hand on the back side, that we feel a big bevel, big flat bevel, because then we feel the orientation of the racket. So just an example, you must pay attention a bit to the handles. Some brands have more round handles, and some brands have a bit more elongated handles. So as far as I know, Fölkel has a bit more elongated handles like this, and let's say head also, but some are more round. So if you feel the racket well, then it's okay, but if you don't feel it well, or if you're struggling in some way, you have to try to change the handle or change your brand so that you feel, okay, now I know how the racket is oriented in space. And also when you change the grip, that you automatically feel, okay, now I'm on the back side of the racket. Now I'm on this side of the racket and I'm pushing like this through contact. And when I'm hitting a backhand, I am pushing like this racket through contact. So when you feel the grip that way, that it's the grip in your hand must feel flat. The grip must not feel round. So to me the grip feels flat. So my hand is in a way like this. So it's like this. So my hand is behind the racket. I feel like I'm hitting with my hand, the forehand, and I put it here. So this is how the racket feels in my hand. So another reason why players lose the feeling of the flat surfaces of the racket is because they grip the racket very tight, they squeeze the fingers, and now they don't really feel clearly the sensation of the hand, of the palm. They feel the fingers strongly and they lose the sensation of the palm. So the fingers must not squeeze the racket very tight. You must feel the backside of the racket. So if I exaggerate, I feel the racket like this. So I feel it like this. It comes flat in my hand, and then I gently close the fingers. And I know exactly how the racket is oriented when I'm hitting the ball, and then it doesn't bother me if I hit the ball higher or lower or wherever, because to me it's always natural to position the hand to the ball. So to everyone you don't have to be a tennis player, you would naturally position the hand to the ball at the right angle. Even at this height you wouldn't come like this or like this. If you do it slowly, you will see, okay, this is very natural. So now hitting the ball at this height is no problem because I feel that the racket will be at the right angle. So what exercise can you do to feel the racket orientation in your hand? I suggest these simple progressions. I'm going to show you later on in a minute how it looks in an actual lesson, but here I just want to show you what to do. So what you need to do is you need to put your hand behind the strings like this. You hold gently here with your left, so now I'm showing you for the forehand. And someone can throw you the ball, like your coach or your friend can throw you the ball, or even you can have a ball machine to give you a nice ball. And I suggest you start on mini tennis and you try to hit the ball like this. So this should be the finish with the racket vertical. And you're practicing just very fundamental basic movement of the forehand, because this will clearly map to your mind that the racket face is nothing else than a big hand, because now they are perfectly aligned. So when you're hitting like this, you will get the sensation, okay, hitting a forehand is like hitting with a hand, except now that I have a big hand, so it will be easier. So that's the first step. And then the second progression is to slide your hand down to the throat of the racket. I suggest you don't close the fingers much, you just hold the racket here, that you still feel that the hand is oriented towards the ball. So then you hit a few balls like this, maybe for a couple of minutes, 2 minutes, and then you slide the hand down to the handle, and now you just hold with one hand and you hit a few balls. You can also open the fingers a bit like this, and then you try to feel the back side of the racket. So this plane, and this plane, and your hand are all in the same plane, and you try to feel, okay, I feel that I'm pushing my big hand that is now a bit extended through the ball. So similarly for two-handed backhand, you start like this in the same way, then you slide down, you play here, and eventually you play here. Of course this hand stays on the racket. So at first open the fingers, don't close the fingers, and try to feel, okay, I feel the back side of the racket, I'm pushing the racket through the contact, and I go up. So of course this exercise is an exaggeration. and it has one like missing part, and the missing part is that we're not working on the wrist leg. So this is just a very basic movement. Of course, we fix the wrist. When we do this exercise, the wrist is fixed in place. So we can do for a while this exercise, and with the beginner we can set the wrist in the position, for example on the forehand. We don't have to do a dynamic wrist leg. Beginners are just fine by setting the wrist and hitting. So similar on the backhand, they can just set the wrist and hit nicely. But later on we should add some exercises that help them feel a bit more dynamic wrist, so that the wrist leg happens a bit more dynamically. So also here on this side, and they will get a bit extra pop on the ball. That's right, perfect. Yes, yes, body rotation, hips rotation, yes, and feeling very stable, very stable. That's right. Yes, now you slide your hand down again. So now we were here, right? We were here, now here, now here. But don't close the fingers yet. Just like this.
Yes.
The net, nice and easy. Yes, so aim at me, at my chest. Yes, very nice. Yes, again. There we go. Yes, okay, try to play to me. Yeah, very good.